The recent reported death of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in an Israeli airstrike has shaken the already volatile situation in the Middle East. Nasrallah had led Hezbollah for over 3 decades, and his death could have major implications for the region's stability as well as the dynamics of the conflict with Israel and Iran's influence. What does it mean for the conflict in the Middle East? Well, joining us today on TVP World to discuss these developments is Daniel Pipes, president of the Middle East Forum. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you.
So can you tell us how significant actually is the death of Hassan Nasrallah for Hezbollah and its operations?
His predecessor was killed by the Israelis 32 years ago, and it didn't make that much difference. Now, that was more an isolated death, and this is part of a larger attack. I don't know. It depends on what the Iranians decide. It depends on the successor to Hassan Nasrallah. This could be a major event in its evolution. It could lead to its decline. It could also be a fairly minor one. I think it's too early to say at this point.
Right. So there's still, of course, like you mentioned, very hard to tell what's going to happen going forward. But do you think that this might impact Hezbollah's military or political strategy in Lebanon, at least for this short period of time before someone comes and takes their place?
Definitely the existing leadership of Hezbollah and the leadership in Iran, starting with the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, have major decisions now. Do they attack Israel with everything they have and risk the destruction of Hezbollah? Or do they quietly go away and leave this problem and rebuild? Again, I don't know what they're going to do. My inclination is to say I think they will leave this problem and rebuild, because it looks like the destruction that the Israelis have hammered on Hezbollah in the last 2 weeks requires them to go back and rebuild.
Right. And does this affect the whole broader, what's called the axis of resistance and Iran's regional ambitions? Or do you think, like you mentioned, maybe things might just carry on as usual? At least this might send some warning to Iran's leader, correct?
Correct. This is the most aggressive that the Israelis have been versus the Iranian-backed groups, in particular Hamas and Hezbollah. And it must be causing the Iranian leadership in Tehran to think through their strategy, whether it's working or not. So I think there are a lot of questions facing Hezbollah, Hamas, the Iranians. What are they doing next? Are they going to retreat, or are they going to continue to aggress against Israel? As I said before, I think they're going to retreat a bit. I think this was a painful couple of weeks, and in a sense, a painful year. The Iranians probably did not expect Israel to go into Gaza in the way it has. They did not expect the destruction of Hamas that has taken place. I think the Iranians have been surprised by the resolve of the Israelis, who they tend to see as weak. They tend to dismiss as without determination.
All right, so with that in mind, do you think that further escalation is going to be something of a concern, or do you think things will actually de-escalate now that they are more worried about, well, what's going to happen if things keep heating up?
Let me preface this by saying I have no idea, but if you push me for an answer, I would say I'm inclined to see this de-escalation rather than escalation. I think the Iranians and their allies have suffered some severe losses and are inclined to retract a bit, rethink a bit, and not throw everything they have at Israel.
Right, definitely a very, very complicated situation, and development, of course, is still just rolling in. But from an outside perspective, looking in from the international community, international actor, and the United States, what role can other international partners play in kind of trying to contain the situation? Do you think it's even possible at this point?
I think the best thing that international actors can do is to go to Tehran and tell the Ayatollah Khamenei to stop. He is creating all sorts of problems, not only for the region, but for himself. And it would be wise to cut back on this aggression. this seven-front war with Israel. It's not working. Time to rethink, time to calibrate, time to stop being so murderous.
But do you think that is something that could be done realistically? Do you think that the assassination maybe could be a turning point to start this dialogue, or do you think Iran will still be relatively reluctant to cooperate?
I think the Iranians will be relatively reluctant, but my greater concern is that Western powers will not be going to Tehran and not conveying a kind of message that I've suggested, that they will be trying to bridge the differences between Tehran and Jerusalem. I don't think we want to bridge the differences. I think we want to tell the Iranians to stop it. Stop it now and stop it permanently.
That's pretty interesting. Can you tell me why do you think there's this reluctance to, do what you has just mentioned, but instead trying to seek like the alternative of bridging differences?
There are a lot of reasons. Some of them are commercial. Some of them have to do with views within, especially on the left, among Islamists in Western countries, which are now not insignificant. Some of it has to do with a abiding dislike of Israel and Israelis. So various factors.
Right. And what do you think are some of the possible implications for the Lebanese government and its already fragile political state?
The Lebanese government is not much of a government. Hezbollah is more powerful militarily and economically than the Lebanese government. It's called a state within the state, and that's a good description. So really, the Lebanese government has historically been weak, and given the financial crisis of the past few years, it is weaker than ever. So really, it's a decision for Hezbollah and Hezbollah's masters in Tehran to reach, not the Lebanese government.
And last but not least, do you think Nasrallah's death would affect Hezbollah's relation with other regional actors like Syria, for example?
Well, we're reading about great joy in parts of Syria about the death of Hassan Nasrallah. Hezbollah was actively engaged on the side of the Syrian government, murdering the Syrian people. So the government will be unhappy, but many people in Syria will be happy. Hezbollah had a murderous reign has had a murderous reign, still there, in Lebanon and to a certain extent in Syria as well. So one hears a surprising number of Muslim voices saying that they're relieved that this very competent and very evil man is now gone.
All right, I do see a lot of very kind of polarizing opinions when it comes to this particular incident. And some people are expressing joy, like you mentioned, and some people are sharing their concerns. What do you think all this polarization is coming from? And why do you think that the views of this incident is so divided?
Well, the basic divide in the Middle East is between the Islamists and the anti-Islamists. It's no longer about Arab nationalism. It's no longer about Israel. It's about Islam. It's about the Iranian version of Islam, and to a lesser extent, the Turkish version of Islam, which are very aggressive. And what you see are three sides, the Iranian, the Turkish, the Saudi-led one, we call it. And although the Saudis are Muslims and ex-Muslims, they're not Islamists at this point. They're not seeking to expand the rule of Islamic law. They're not seeking a caliphate. They're not seeking to undo the existing order. So they are more status quo oriented, whereas the Iranians are revolutionaries. They want to throw over the existing order and change it into an Islamic order, a medieval Islamic order. So that's the great divide in the Middle East and beyond, in other regions where Muslims are a majority.
Right. And like you mentioned earlier, of course, this information, a lot of it's still fresh and a lot of information still rolling out. So we'll have to see what happens in the next few days. Meanwhile, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TV World.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.